Today is July 25th, 2018. Okay, so what is codependency? What do we do with it? How to understand it? And feel free to be asking questions in the chat. I will take questions at the end. All right, some recommended webinars. All of the webinars are wonderful, in my opinion. I listen to them myself over and over again. I'm always learning something new. So please keep listening to those webinars, those podcasts. When you're driving, it's really nice to listen to them. You can just download the podcast on your podcast app or on SoundCloud if you have an Android, and tune in there. So you don't always have to be at your computer, because I know all of us are busy. So cut yourself some slack and just listen to them on the podcast app, okay? So I'm going to be talking about codependency, how to heal it, what to do with it. It's obviously always more complex, and it's never black and white. So if we can just remember that as a rule of thumb, that nothing about our children, nothing about life is about that simple. It's a good rule of thumb. So what is codependency anyway? I think we hear this word a lot. I think it's becoming more well-known and talked about in especially pop psychology. You know, if you do a Google search, you're going to find a good amount of information on it. So from the coda.org website, I like their definition because I think it applies to not just coda, but what we're doing in AA, what we're doing in NA, a lot of the relational work that we're doing at Evoke with your children, with you guys, and helping you reframe the ways in which you might perceive your relationship with your child, with your spouse, with your partners, whoever. So from coda.org, we welcome you to Codependence Anonymous, a program of recovery from codependence, where each of us may share our experience, strength, and hope in our effort to find freedom where there has been bondage, and peace where there has been turmoil in our relationships with others and ourselves. Okay, so bondage and turmoil are good indicators of maybe some codependency happening, okay? So many of us were raised in families where addictions existed. It doesn't necessarily have to be to substances. This could be just having codependence passed down through generations, or various traumas that have happened, and the ways in which we have tried to manage those childhood woundings can impact our ability to be codependent or have a healthy attachment. Also, another disclaimer here is that we all, in my opinion, we all fall on the spectrum of codependency. It's not like you're either codependent or you're not. I think that because we're human beings, because we attach biologically, we have to understand that we all are going to have some degree of codependence. It just depends on what we define it as and the degrees in which it shows up and how intense or extreme it is, right? So usually the original term of codependence came from families where there was addiction or alcoholism happening. Okay, so in their definition from CODA, many of us were raised in families where addictions existed, and some of us were not. So it doesn't have to always happen like co-occurring with addiction in a family. In either way, we have found that in each of our lives, that codependence is a most deeply rooted compulsive behavior, and that it's born out of our sometimes moderately, right, spectrum, sometimes extremely dysfunctional family systems. And we have each experienced in our own ways the painful trauma of the emptiness of our childhood and relationships throughout our lives. So we're going to talk more about that emptiness, but from the flip side of it, in terms of building a sense of self as a way to heal from these patterns of codependency, okay? So we attempted to use others, whether it be our partners, our friends, or even our children, many of us are codependent with our children or our parents, as our sole source of identity, value, and well-being. And as a way of trying to restore within us the emotional losses of our childhood. So what they're saying is using somebody else as a way to fill ourselves up from the things or the ways in which we didn't get our needs met in childhood. Okay, So if you've been to a parent workshop, you'll have seen the perfect parent myth. There's also a podcast on it, so go back and review that. I always like to remind parents that this is not about being perfect. It's about knowing yourself as a means to then know your child. Okay, so when we are codependent, usually that there's something that was missing inside from our childhood that we are then looking to others to fulfill. Okay, so our histories may include other powerful addictions, which at times we have used to cope with our codependence, right? So then we could bring in other maladaptive coping strategies to help us manage the pain of codependency, because it really is painful. Okay. So we're going to go through some of the signs of codependency. And rather than just overwhelm you with all of the signs and symptoms, we're going to go through the different categories and then the ways in which we can think about it differently, so that we can feel some hope as we go. Okay, I think sometimes when we're doing this work, when our children are at Evoke, when we're looking at ourselves, it can feel overwhelming or like a hill without end. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. And we have to remember that there is healing happens gradually over time. And so we're going to flip back and forth between here's what the unhealthy thought patterns look like and here's what the healthier thought patterns look like. As we go through, I would like you, if you have pen and paper, to sit down and say, okay, here's our denial category. I check one, like maybe 5 out of the 8. Or in avoidance, I have 3 out of the 10. Okay, just note which ones you do more, because this is going to give you a lot of insight into how you manage your relationship with your child, with your partners. I'm from San Francisco, so I'm used to saying partners. If anybody gets that joke. Okay, so denial, codependence. Codependents often have a difficult time identifying what they're feeling. Okay. They minimize, alter, or deny how they truly feel. Okay, perceive themselves as completely unselfish and dedicated to the well-being of others. Okay, raise. Some of you probably already are raising your hand. Okay, lack of empathy for the feelings and needs of others. They label other people with their negative traits. So they might say, well, he's always angry, when really the anger is coming from myself. I'm just not aware. Okay, so a lot of these are defenses as well. Some of them are Freudian defenses that Freud originally identified. They think that they can take care of themselves without any help from others, which is not realistic. Life is hard sometimes, and we do need help. They mask their pain in various ways through maybe anger or humor or isolation. Okay, they express negativity or aggression in indirect or passive ways, And that's why learning the I feel statement is so important. Learning that feedback statement is so important, because then we are learning to be more direct with our communication. And direct, healthy communication is a big asset when we are working to heal codependency. Okay. And then they don't recognize the unavailability of those people to whom they're attracted. So maybe this reminds you of yourself when you were dating, or maybe you're divorced now and dating, and you're thinking about the fact that maybe you keep attracting in people unavailable. They're really not able to hold space for you or be there for you in a way that feels okay. Okay. And also the difficulty identifying what they're feeling. This can often look like, I just have thoughts, but I don't know what the feelings are. I don't know. I don't have any feelings. I don't have any sensations in my body. That can look like that too. Okay. So how to work with this denial. So again, be maybe tallying, being honest with yourself. Where do I fit in here? What symptoms do I identify with? Okay. Awareness is the biggest step. So recovery of denial. In recovery, healthier thought patterns look like, I am aware of my feelings and I identify them, often in the moment. I know the difference between my thoughts and feelings. Okay. I embrace my feelings and they are valid and important. I'm not diminishing them. I'm not invalidating myself. I'm not pushing them away to pretend like they're not important. I know the difference between caring and caretaking. I recognize that caretaking is often motivated by a need to benefit myself. So really they're talking about control, okay? When we're trying to caretake too much versus care. I'm able to feel compassion for another's feelings and needs. I acknowledge that I may own the negative traits that I often perceive in others. So again, this is starting to turn around, look at ourselves in the mirror and see that, oh, I'm starting to notice our own shadow, notice our own wounds. Okay? I acknowledge that I sometimes need the help of others. I can't always do it alone. I'm aware of my painful feelings and I express them appropriately, assertively. I'm able to express my feelings openly, directly, and calmly, right? Staying in that assertive place on the communication continuum. It's what we're teaching your kids all the time. Usually they're coming in with either assaultive, aggressive, or passive or withdrawn behavior most of the time. So when we can all learn how to communicate from the middle of that spectrum in a nonviolent way, and again, Nonviolent Communication is a wonderful book to read about this topic. Okay, I am able to express my feelings openly, directly, and calmly. I'm able to self-regulate even my emotions. I'm able to take space if I'm feeling dysregulated, angry, stressed, irritated. Something that I was teaching parents at the parent workshop this weekend, something that Brad Reedy taught me in my work with him, is that if I'm feeling anything other than open, curious, compassionate, and not knowing. Some of those are kind of the same. So open and not knowing, curious and compassionate, it's my stuff, right? So if I'm feeling anything other than those things, I need to take some space and go figure it out with myself. Figure out what is the wound that's being triggered, what's happening inside of me that's hard for me to show up for this person right now. Okay? And this is all about capacity and our capacity to be with other people in a healthy way, emotionally. Okay. I pursue intimate relationships only with others who want and are able to engage in healthy and loving relationships. Okay, that's a whole other webinar. All right. Low self-esteem, another hallmark of codependency. We are in the low self-esteem category, and you could fall into many categories here. You have different traits in different places, okay? I have difficulty making decisions. They judge what they think, say, or do harshly as never good enough, judging ourselves. We're embarrassed to receive recognition, praise, or gifts. We value others' approval of our thinking, feelings, and behavior over our own. Okay, so valuing other people's approval over our own approval of ourselves. We don't perceive ourselves as lovable or worthwhile people. We seek recognition and praise to overcome feeling less than. So it's looking for external validation to feel okay about the fact that I actually don't feel okay. Okay. We have difficulty admitting when we've made a mistake. We have the need to appear to be right in the eyes of others and may even lie to look good. Okay. We're unable to identify, ask for what we want and need. Perceive ourselves as superior to others. Again, as an overcompensation, not feeling good enough. Look to others to provide our sense of safety in the world emotionally. Have difficulty getting started, meeting deadlines, completing projects, and have trouble setting healthy priorities and boundaries. Recovery from low self-esteem. I trust my ability to make effective decisions. Okay. Also, you feel free to be taking pictures of the recovery slides. I think it's important to these are almost like affirmations that you can say every day to yourself as a way of working through some of these limiting beliefs, really. So I trust my ability to make effective decisions. I accept myself as I am, all my imperfections, and with all my perfection. Okay, I emphasize progress over perfection. If you want to watch an interesting take on that, you can Google the CEO of Spanx. Her dad would ask her things that she had failed at every week. Oops. Coming back here. Okay. So she talks about that and how her dad emphasized, what did you fail at this week? And it helped her get comfortable with making mistakes and trying new things. And actually the failure ended up being not trying. Now she runs a multi-million or billion-dollar company. Okay. I feel appropriately worthy of the recognition, praise, or gifts that I receive. I value the opinions of those I trust. However, without needing to gain their approval, I have confidence in myself. Right? I recognize myself as being lovable and valuable. I seek my own approval first, and then I examine my motivations carefully when I seek approval from others. I continue to take personal inventory, and when I am wrong, I promptly admit it. Really powerful exercise that you can do with your kids. They're still really mad at you, if you guys are still working, they're in the earlier stages of their treatment, is to find something that you can say sorry for. And multiple kids in my group this week have big turnarounds simply because parents said, I'm really sorry. I didn't know what to do. I don't always know what to do. I made a mistake. This might not be the absolute best decision, and I'm doing the best that I can. So that indicates a strong, healthy sense of self from you to be able to admit when you're wrong. And just by doing that, or when you might have made a mistake, it could be the smallest thing, you guys. It doesn't have to be that you failed them completely in their life. It doesn't have that. It could be the smallest thing. And it indicates and shows as an example of how they can then take ownership of their own lives and what healthy self-esteem looks like as well. Okay. Compliance, another category here of codependence. They're extremely loyal, remaining in harmful situations too long. You see this a lot with alcoholism or intense rage or abuse, like one spouse is protecting another spouse, okay? Or they're staying too long in a relationship that doesn't serve them. Compromise their own values and integrity to avoid rejection or anger. Okay, an example of this is something that I did, that I figured out that I could do when I was a kid, because my parents were stressed, there was chaos at home, and I had figured out, because I was emotionally attuned, or I somehow developed pretty strong emotional attunement to be able to sense into somebody else's state, into their emotions. I could tell, I could be upstairs and I could know that by the way that my mom came in and out of the house, by the way the door either slammed or didn't, or the way the door opened or closed, it could have been more subtle than slamming, what kind of night it was going to be. And I knew then, what I figured out anyway, especially as an oldest child, eldest children will try to do the best that they can, and be really good. Okay. So as the oldest child, I figured out that if I was really good and put my needs aside and showed up for my parents, that maybe they would give me what I needed. Maybe they would be less stressed. They would be less angry. Okay. And they've since done their own work. I'm not saying the family system is perfect. They're never perfect. And that's a state of codependence there that I've had to work on for a long time. And it's shown up in my adulthood. Okay, so that takes work. All these things take work. So that's an example of compromising our own values and integrity to avoid rejection or anger. We put aside our own interests in order to do what others want. We're hypervigilant. Again, this was me, going back to that example. Hypervigilant regarding the feelings of others, and we take on those feelings. So we're kind of like a sponge. We're a little too energetically or emotionally permeable, and we take in everybody's stuff. Okay, we're afraid to express our beliefs, feelings, opinions when they differ from those of others. Okay, because maybe there wasn't space for them. There's not enough space at home for difference of opinion, of feelings, of perspective, that can feel really scary, that can feel really unsafe. And then everybody kind of comes together in this homogenous blob. And we'll see this in the groups, okay? They'll come together and nobody wants to rock the boat. Nobody wants to disagree with one another because there's not enough of a sense of self to feel okay with conflict, with disagreement. Okay? So as we build our sense of self, that difference feels better. It feels okay. And it probably would feel like relieving, like a relief. Okay. They accept sexual attention when what they really want is love. Right? May they make decisions without regard to the consequences, fill the need of people, or we give up our truth to gain the approval of others or to avoid change. Okay. Compliance, recovery from compliance. I'm committed to my safety and I leave situations that feel unsafe or are inconsistent with my goals. I am rooted in my own values even if others don't agree or become angry. I consider my interests and feelings when asked to participate in another's plans. And I will say no and feel okay saying no if those plans are out of alignment with what I want or need. I can separate my feelings from the feelings of others. I allow myself to experience my feelings and others to be responsible for their feelings. So this is another one of those principles. We don't make anybody feel anything. I hear this a lot from the kids. Well, they made me feel like this. That is not, we are all responsible for our own happiness, for our own well-being, for our own state. Okay, of course, with the exception of young children, right? Of course. I respect my own opinions and feelings and express them appropriately. My sexuality is grounded in genuine intimacy and connection. When I need to feel loved, I express my heart's desire. So I feel okay being vulnerable. I feel strong enough to be open with how I feel, and I do not settle for sex without love. I ask my higher power, whatever that is, it doesn't have to be, it could be anything. Okay, whatever is there is our higher power. I ask my higher power for guidance and consider possible consequences before I make decisions. I stand in my truth and maintain my integrity whether others approve or not, even if it means making difficult changes in my life. Okay. Control. I believe people are capable of taking care of themselves. So what this can look like is you may not think that consciously, but you might be doing everything for your kid or your spouse, or other people are doing everything for you. And what I've this piece in particular is when parents have not given the child the chance to feel frustration or do hard things, or they're rescuing them a lot, it sends the signal to the child that they are not capable of doing it themselves. Okay. And then it creates this learned helplessness and apathy and lack of motivation and low self-esteem. Okay. We attempt to convince others what to do, think, or feel. We freely offer advice and direction without being asked. I laugh because this has been a favorite of mine, okay, in the past. Become resentful when others decline our help or reject our advice when they didn't ask for it in the first place, okay? We give lavish gifts and favors to those we want to influence, right? That's about us. We use sexual attention to gain approval and acceptance. We have to feel needed in order to have a relationship with others. We demand that our needs be met by others. Okay. And I use the word our because I want to remind us all that we all have some of these traits. Nobody's perfect in these areas. Okay, so this is about compassion and inclusion, remembering that none of us are perfect. Okay. We use charm and charisma to convince others of our capacity to be caring and compassionate. rather than just being caring and compassionate and letting that speak for itself. We use blame and shame to exploit others emotionally. Again, so it's manipulative. We refuse to cooperate, compromise, or negotiate. We adopt an attitude of indifference, helplessness, authority, or rage to manipulate outcomes. Okay, so again, that's defense in a more psychoanalytic perspective, okay, from Freud, kind of Freud type work. Use recovery jargon in an attempt to control the behaviors of others. Okay, so somebody might have been through many different treatment programs already, and now they're at a voc, and they might still be using some of that treatment jargon or therapy jargon as an attempt to get what they want and kind of work the system, right? They would pretend to agree with others to get what they want. Okay. Recovery from control. I realize that with rare exceptions, other adults are capable of managing their own lives. Goodness, this is so freeing when we just let this be, when we let people make decisions themselves, especially our young adult children, and then experience the natural consequences that come from that. Okay. I accept the thoughts, choices, and feelings of others, even though I may not be comfortable with them. I may not like it. I give advice only when asked. I am content to see others take care of themselves. They're building their sense of self, their self-esteem by doing things themselves. I carefully and honestly contemplate my motivations when preparing to give a gift, especially in visits to the field. Okay, what is your intention? A lot of parents like to bring stuff. And in my group, we don't do that. Okay, every therapist is different, so you defer to your therapist, but in my group, we don't do that, mostly because I want your presence to be enough for both you and the child. Okay? I embrace and celebrate my sexuality as evidence of my health and wholeness. I do not use it to gain the approval of others. I develop relationships with others based on equality, intimacy, and balance. It's not a one-up, I'm more powerful than you kind of power dynamic in the relationship. I find and use resources that meet my needs without making demands on others. I ask for help when I need it without exception. Okay, I behave authentically with others, allowing my caring and compassionate qualities to emerge. Okay, I ask directly for what I want and need and trust the outcome to my higher power. I do not try to manipulate outcomes with blame or shame. I cooperate, compromise, and negotiate with others in a way that honors my integrity. So again, remembering my needs, my own sense of self, my wholeness, and then entering into relationship, into a conversation with others. I treat others with respect and consideration and trust my higher power. I think I said this already. Trust my higher power to meet my needs and desires. Okay. I use my recovery for my own growth, my therapy for my own growth, and not to manipulate or control others. I use my own self-development for my own growth. Okay. My communication with others is authentic and truthful. Avoidance. We act in ways that invite others to reject, shame, or express anger towards us. We judge harshly what others think, say, or do. This also comes from judging ourselves. Our judgment of others is just a projection of how we judge ourselves. So as we heal our relationship with ourselves and judging ourselves, then we can start to heal the ways in which we judge others. Okay. We avoid emotional, physical, or sexual intimacy as a way to maintain distance. Yeah. We allow addictions to people, places, and things to distract us from achieving intimacy in relationships. We use indirect or evasive communication to avoid conflict or confrontation. Again, going back to the importance of the I feel statement, assertive feedback, things like that. We diminish our capacity to have healthy relationships by declining to use the tools of recovery. So this kind of self-sabotage here. diminish our capacity to have healthy relationships by declining to use the tools that we're learning anyway. Okay? Suppress our feelings or needs to avoid feeling vulnerable. Pull people towards us, but then when they get close, we push them away. And if you want more on that, you can go back to my webinar from 2 weeks ago. It should be in the parent portal and on YouTube. All right. That's more of an attachment. Okay. We refuse to give up our self-will to avoid surrendering to a power greater than ourselves. So again, trying to be in control all the time. We believe displays of emotion are a sign of weakness, and we withhold expressions of appreciation. Recovery from avoidance. I act in ways that encourage loving and healthy responses from others. I keep an open mind and accept others as they are. I engage in emotional, physical, or sexual intimacy when it's healthy and appropriate for me. I practice my recovery, therapy, self-development to develop healthy and fulfilling relationships. I use direct and straightforward communication to resolve conflicts and deal appropriately with confrontations. When I use the tools of recovery, I am able to develop and maintain healthy relationships of my choosing, not just based on who gives me attention. I embrace my own vulnerability by trusting and honoring my feelings and needs. I welcome close relationships while maintaining healthy boundaries. Okay, so this comes into a fear of engulfment and goes back to the anxious avoidant attachment style, again, going back to my webinar from 2 weeks ago. Okay, so I welcome close relationships while maintaining healthy boundaries. So that's, again, coming back to a fear of engulfment because perhaps our parents were too enmeshing as children. They were too involved. They weren't reading into us enough. We're going to get more into that soon. I believe in and trust a power greater than myself. I willingly surrender my self-will to my higher power. I honor my authentic emotions and share them when appropriate. I freely engage in expressions of appreciation towards others. Okay. So, understanding our wounds. I love this quote. The best predictor of how a child did in terms of their attachment or healing or recovery to their parent was the way that parent had made sense of his or her life. That it wasn't what happened to you as the parent. It's actually how you made sense of what happened to you. And this goes back to our wounding as well. So if our parents didn't make sense of their wounding, usually what would happen is they would pass that on to us as frozen pieces of unresolved trauma. Okay? So we have to start to understand. I mean, we don't have to, it's our choice, right? But if we want to heal, we really have to look at our wounding, our childhood, the ways in which we are codependent, and make sense of that and work with that. To correct the behavior without understanding the psychodynamics of it is ineffective ultimately. Okay, the wound to the soul will simply find another, perhaps more subtle venue for its expression. So what does this mean? To try to, like if I just gave you all those phrases and said, okay, well just think differently. Think your way out of codependence. Thinking differently helps to a degree, and yet it's still not addressing the underlying ego wound that's causing the codependence in the first place, right? So by psychodynamics of it, that just means the underlying what's happening in your psyche, okay? So ultimately, we're going to come up short if we just try to change thinking about it rather than practicing something new, working with a competent therapist. Okay, so and as we heal this, it'll show up in subtler ways. It's going to require more of our attention in a sense that we're gonna have to be more vigilant to catch it in some senses when it's happening, because we've gotten better at awareness, perhaps, or better at identifying when we're showing those of codependency. And we're going to have to be more on guard for those ways in which we're maybe not healthy in our relationships. So this quote is from the Eden Project. Highly recommend that book. It's quite dense, and if you're into this stuff and you've been studying this stuff, you've been in your own work for a while, I highly recommend it. Any social worker will testify that it usually takes several incidents before the victim will leave the abuser or get a restraining order. For the first few times, victims will rationalize the abuse. The rationalization protects them not from their abusers, but from the enormity of the primal parent-child template. Okay. Thus, unwittingly, they conspire against themselves to remain not only with the abuser, but with the powerlessness of childhood. This is a big statement. So the rationalization protects them not just from the abuser, but more so from the massive amount of work they would have to do to heal that primal parent-child template, the wounding, the inadequacy of their parents, which all of us, none of us are completely adequate all the time, okay? In order for us to heal that, right? So we are actually, when we are defending our codependency or our addiction or any of the things that we do that are maladaptive, it's actually because the work to heal it feels more daunting than the pain they're experiencing in the present moment because of it. Okay, questions, let me know, because I think we have to really sit with that piece. Okay. Thus, unwittingly, they conspire against themselves, so the self-sabotage happens, not only with the abuser, but with the powerless. They conspire against themselves to remain not only the abuser, but with the powerlessness of childhood. So they're giving their power away so that they don't have to necessarily look, or we don't necessarily have to look at how powerless or sad or angry we might feel about what happened in our childhood. Okay, so this is similar to that dynamic of Stockholm syndrome where the victim feels so powerless, it's easier to identify with their abuser than to fight the intense powerlessness. Okay. So if the child felt powerless in the face of the other, usually the parent, who was their source of well-being, and this is the example that goes back to my example of my childhood, they felt so powerless in the face of the other, so they learn to be pleasing, mollifying, or overly responsible for the well-being of others. Okay, so this is codependence and an anxiety management strategy. So it's adaptive in some ways. They're trying to get their needs met. We are all trying to just get our needs met, right? And so we subconsciously think that if I'm responsive to the needs of others or the other, then maybe they'll be there for me, right? So what happens though is we develop these codependent traits as an adaptive strategy, but then they don't get healed and we take them with us into our adolescence and adulthood and into our parenting, okay? So the child is trying to reduce anxiety and heal the parents, which of course they can't do, right? It's not their job to heal their parent. It's not our job to heal our parents, right? So they felt so powerless in childhood that they use power and control now as a way to manage that feeling of powerlessness. Okay, so maybe they're high functioning, or they're high performing, or maybe this is you, or controlling of their environments and others. And then they bury or sacrifice their own budding personality and sense of self in the process, thereby repeating this pattern. Okay. So then again, this template becomes our template for adult relationships. So we're going to take this mold and we're going to apply it to each of our adult relationships until we heal this wound. Okay, I like to joke that this is why we might have dated many different people, but in different bodies. The same person, but in different bodies. Okay. So if you've had that experience of like, why do I dated a lot, or maybe my child keeps dating the same person in a different body, it's because of this wounding, this template that's there, and they're trying to find healing, and the thing's going to keep coming up, the wound will keep coming up until we pay attention and until we heal it. Okay, the psyche, the mind is always trying to heal itself. Okay. So how to truly love. Consider the courage of those truly willing to look within and own what they find. This is also from the Eden Project. Okay, so when we are in treatment, when your child's in treatment, when you're in treatment, what we are doing, one way of looking at it, is that we are building ego strength. And what I mean by this is all the defenses that we have, that we've exhibited, like all the things, all these codependent traits, or all the ways in which we protect ourselves from the thing that feels painful. Okay, this can look like addiction, this can look like control, this can look like always going to anger, this can look like all sorts of things, sexually acting out, verbally acting out, all the ways that probably all the things you can think of that your child is with us at Evoke for, right? What we're doing is, if you imagine a building that's got a shaky foundation, maybe some of the bricks weren't laid right, the cement didn't dry all the way, maybe the wood's kind of rotting out from the bottom because of some trauma. So there's some wounding, there's something's happening there that's compromising the foundation of their psyche. And what we're doing at Evoke with all these tools, and in psychotherapy in general, in self-work in general, is we are building scaffolds around the building such that we can we'll lift the building completely and rebuild that foundation. Or maybe it's higher up in the structure. Maybe your child wounding or your wounding happened in the last couple of years or 6 months. So then that's more of a roofing problem. A little easier to fix than a foundation problem. Foundation problems are going to be like, maybe they're neurotypical, right? That's harder to manage. It's challenging to deal with that, and that's going to be a lifelong struggle and need for help, right? Or maybe there's a personality disorder or some kind of disorganization in the personality in general. Okay, so it can look like a lot of things. So when we're building ego structure, it's like we're building this scaffolding, putting lots of support under your child in the form of structure, of emotional safety, of lots of opportunity for therapy and growth and work, right? Of a balanced diet. And we are building them up, helping them their self-esteem, so that we can start to peel back. And also the ego wounding, or the ego, building the ego strength, comes from healing wounds as well, or healing trauma. And then these scaffolds, which we could also think about as defenses, okay, another way of looking at the scaffolding, those other behaviors, maybe the addictive behaviors, the codependence, or those things are going to start to fall away naturally, because we're not going to need it to protect so much. Okay, so if we can think of all of these maladaptive behaviors as cry for help, as a way in which we've protected ourselves, that our child has protected themselves, then we can start to understand and have more compassion for why they were doing these, what we might have thought is crazy things, or behaving in these ways that we just can't understand. Or ourselves, maybe we're like, why do I do that compulsive thing? Okay, it's all related to codependency. It's all kind of interwoven, it's all connected, right? So how to truly love, we're building that self, that ego structure, and this is really the key here, and that's why your own psychotherapy is so important as a parent, right? That parallel process is so important. So Carl Jung, who, when he was studying himself, always felt humbled. So know that into your work. When we study ourselves, we are constantly humbled, and I know this from my own work. right? And what I say is that every therapist needs to have a therapist, or else they're not really walking their talk, right? When we study ourselves, we are constantly humbled by what we find, and it's hard, and it's the most rewarding work that we can do. Right? So know that it's going to be painful. We're maybe sometimes we're pulling scaffold, the defenses off before we might feel ready. Evoke probably felt that way, right? In Eastern traditions, this process of self-study is called svadhyaya, or the study of the self, or spiritual texts, whatever that is for you, okay, if that applies for you. But really, it's the study of the self, and this was first referenced in this way about 5,000 years ago by the sage Patanjali. Okay, so the East has been talking about this for some time now, and we're kind of just catching up to it in Western psychology. Okay, and the things that feel humbling, that feel like defeats by the ego, so those times when we're really struggling to, maybe in our own work or in our work with our kid, we're trying to communicate in a new way, it's feeling like we're on training wheels or we're learning a new language. Okay, those things that feel humbling, that feel like defeats, is just the ego kind of, or in this sense, by ego, what I mean is the Eastern perspective, or the ego is the false self that separates us from others in our true nature. Okay, so this is a slightly different definition now from the Western concept of the ego. Okay, so can feel like defeat to the ego. So know that, and it's what's happening is that you are you are opening yourself up in a way that's going to feel unfamiliar or hard. And the more ego strength you build, the more courage you find, the more you're going to be able to show up for yourself, for your kid, for your work, for your partner, and for life in general. Okay. So when we enter the therapist's office, I put office in quotes because my office is in a national forest, right? These defensive strategies aren't working anymore. When we show up to therapy, it's because these strategies aren't working. They probably worked for us when we were a kid. Okay. And yet, as we develop into adults, they're not really needed, but we're still holding on to them like 4 suitcases that are way over their weight limit, right, at the airport. So we're finding ourselves making poor choices despite our best intentions, and here we are together at Evoke, or in your work with your therapist. Okay, so going back to this piece about separation, I think this is often what's happening. This is an art installation from a festival called Burning Man, if any of you have heard of that. I did not take this picture, but I love it because it's a representation of this adult self. So it's a picture of 2 adult wire figures, have their backs to each other, they're hunched over. So this is for our podcast listeners now. And then inside are these little kids that just want to connect, that are facing one another, but they're encaged in these adult defenses, when really what we're wanting is connection, and connection with healthy boundaries, right? Connection, openness, vulnerability, combined with healthy boundaries. Okay. So I love that image because of how powerful it is in terms of what we're doing here. Like, why are we doing this work? Why are we doing this work? Like, when we heal ourselves, we are a part of this collective consciousness, or this collective humanity. And when we heal ourselves and work on ourselves, we start to heal and interrupt those patterns of intergenerational trauma. We stop passing these negative behaviors on to other people, and things start to heal at a much greater level. Okay, so this work is not just about ourselves, but about humanity as a whole. So what's our job? What is our job as parents, as people? Our job is to make ourselves happy without relying on others, and come back to our relationships happy. Okay. So again, it's building our capacity, noticing when we don't have the capacity to be with somebody in a way that's open, compassionate, and not knowing. and curious, right? Those 3 or 4 things. Whenever we're not feeling those things, we go away. We can just say, hey, I've got to go somewhere. I've got a ball game to go to, as Brad Reedy will say sometimes to his kids, because they didn't understand it when they were younger. But as your kids get older, you can say, you know what? I'm not feeling myself right now. I need some space. Go to take your space, come back, show up for the relationship. Go make yourself happy, take care of yourself, do what you need to do. And then heal the wounding inflicted unconsciously upon us by our parents. They were imperfect in their parenting, and so are we. And these family of origin wounds, if not looked at and healed, will keep us stuck in our relationships as adults on the merry-go-round of misery, which is codependency, okay? So wilderness therapy, experiential therapy. So they're hiking, they're making fires, they're in a primitive living situation or model that builds a stronger sense of self. It's building that ego strength and helping them with their distress tolerance, their frustration tolerance, so that they can learn to delay gratification, they can learn to be more solid in themselves. And this helps them forge resilience and persistence and cooperation. So then as they create that sense of self with wilderness, because they've got to put up a tarp, a shelter in the rain, and that's hard, or they've got to bust a fire, right? All these ways in which they are challenged to find more resources inside of themselves, and then to not have somebody rescue them from that. They start to realize, I can do this whole life thing. I can show up for life. I can show up for my therapy. I can do this, right? So that sense of self builds, and then they start again to let go of the defenses, the scaffolding, the protective behaviors, the superficial surface level behaviors, acting out in all sorts of ways start to fade and dissolve. And then they look within at the deeper root causes, the family dynamics, the intergenerational trauma, and then they learn to be with the discomfort that comes naturally with self-development and inner work. Okay. You can take questions now, or comments or thoughts. Okay. See, I'm scrolling over here. All right. Private chat. Okay. So observing this, I'm filled with sadness. You can hear the cats in the background. Letting go of control here. Observing this, I'm filled with sadness, feelings of hopelessness and frustration in all my relationships except with my children. I am not codependent, so I'm extremely uncomfortable with how enmeshed I still am with my son and how our interactions are so rife with triggers that it feels like a field of landmines. Do you have any suggestions about how to tolerate this distress? Yeah, I understand cognitive all the processes at work in codependency, but I still have trouble at the visceral emotional level with applying them. Absolutely. Absolutely. So much awareness in this. Thank you for sharing this. Where do we start with this? I love that you're differentiating. So look, she's different, or he, I'm not sure who it is, differentiating between their thoughts and their feelings, saying, I understand cognitively the processes of codependence, but how do I deal with this at a visceral level? Okay. I practice a form of psychotherapy called somatic experiencing. And it helps us get in touch with what's called a felt sense. A felt sense is what you notice, the sensations in your body, the feelings of aliveness, how emotions are processing or happening in your body. Any kind of practice that you can find, whether it's yoga, meditation, finding a somatic experiencing practitioner. If you go to traumahealing.org, that you can go to find a practitioner and find a practitioner in your area. They're going to work in a very specific way to help you connect to your body and get a sense of how does it feel to go towards this distress, because really what you're saying is this distress feels intolerable for me because it's probably coupled with some kind of traumatic or overwhelming experience, right? So helping you go toward that experience, helping it resolve, which they would help you do, and then go back towards that feeling of what feels good. So part of it is resourcing yourself. And by that, I mean taking care of yourself. Again, connecting with your body and learning some mindfulness tools so that as you are moving through these stages, you can just be with that discomfort. And it is that is the hardest work of this. It's easy to understand what's going on here and to start to try to work with our thoughts. But if we're so overwhelmed by the distress that comes up with this, that's where self-compassion comes in, right? The fact that you are noticing that you're aware of the distress and it's really hard for you says a lot about you. Okay, I hope that helps. Okay, do you have some everyday strategies you encourage when the daily challenges and delayed gratification are removed back in our daily communities? Okay, some everyday strategies like for your child when the delayed gratification and daily challenges are removed. Yeah, I would notice your own response. Notice your own reaction to when your child's having a hard time. Because you're going to have some of these things come up every day. So like whenever your child comes home is hard because there's less support. So from what I understand from the question, it's like when we don't have those opportunities to help our child, then how do we create those? I think life's going to create them for them. It's more about your response to your child when those things happen. Do you try to solve the problem? Do you try and pull out this code of, you can go to coda.org and find a PDF of the codependent traits and then the recovery patterns as well, and print it out, put it on your fridge, look at it, and maybe just fold back the part about the part that's just be looking at the recovery piece, to be focusing on recovery, but noticing like, oh, I do this with my kid. This is the assignment for pretty much all my kids in my group this week, is to what is your tendency, and then notice the ways that you're wanting to step in for your child or step in for your partner, your spouse, and let them experience that without rescuing them, right? I hope that helps. Okay. Who is the author of The Eden Project? I see several different ones on Amazon. James Hollis. The Eden Project, In Search of the Magical Other. So it's dense, it's short, and in my opinion, really interesting. This reminds me of a Hindu quote that I like to consider. The questioner asks, how are we to treat others? Ramana Maharishi said, there are no others. Yes, there are no others. Exactly. So this reminds me, so how are we to treat others? And then the sages or the yogi, right? Ramana Maharishi was a guru in India, a spiritual teacher, right? There are no others. So noticing ourselves as we start to do our own work, we start to notice and know our own shadow. We can then start to have compassion and empathy for the shadow of others, including our child. Okay. Thank you for the webinar, Jenna, for sharing your experience with us. Thank you for being on here. Thank you for showing up for your child. Thank you for showing up for yourself. I'm so passionate about this idea that as we heal ourselves, we heal the world. We are all connected in this way. We all have this human experience of wanting connection, struggling with boundaries, struggling with all of these things. So when you show up, when you come on, you are doing the work that is so necessary for our world. Okay. Yeah. Anything else? See if we missed anything. Okay. I'm working very hard and learning so much. My spouse is not and also exhibits many narcissistic markers. It's getting increasingly difficult. I feel more and more alone in my marriage. And the more that I realize what has happened, the more that I realize what has happened and continue to realize that. Yeah, that's the thing, is both spouses have to be on have the same project of making themselves happy and then coming to the marriage happy. So it's really hard when they don't. Also, the definition of codependency in the general population is not as broad as evokes, and I find this frustrating. Also, as others don't see the grandiose way codependency is exhibited at home sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. It's so easy just to kind of hop on Google and work with this kind of cognitively, or read Psychology Today. Not that there's anything wrong with Psychology Today, but it's definitely like a condensed version, kind of the Reader's Digest version. And when we really do our own work, it's so much expansive and challenging and humbling. So my heart is with you. I know. I mean, please keep taking care of yourself in that situation with your marriage and what you might need. And yes, yeah, the general population and the pop psychology sort of definition of codependency is not where I would like it to be either. Okay. Okay. Anything else? So, in terms of upcoming events, if you can make it to 12-step support, these are going to cover a lot of the same principles: Al-Anon, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, NAMI.org, okay, NA, Narcotics Anonymous. They're all kind of dealing with the same thing. So you can go to any of these programs. And I heard from a parent at last weekend's parent workshop that Teens Anonymous, or I think that's what it's called, Teens Anonymous, has been really impactful for their other son who's not at Evoke. So really helpful. And we always ask for you guys to go to at least 6 meetings while your child is with us at Evoke. Social media, again, podcasts, it's on the iPhone and on Apple iOS devices and on the podcast app. Android devices, you're going to want to download the SoundCloud app. Listen while you're driving, while you're exercising, while you're taking care of yourself. I do a lot of that self-development work, listening to audiobooks and things like that while I'm doing my self-care. Computer, go to soundcloud.com, search Evoke Therapy Programs. Twitter and Instagram, Evoke Therapy. If you want to connect with me on Instagram, my name's Jenna Pacelli, or any of the social media sites. I'm happy. I do a lot of this work as well. I talk about similar things, and happy to connect with you there as well. Facebook, search Evoke Therapy Programs. Find the Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook if you want to donate to help other people who can't afford treatment. And then the Evoke Therapy blog for more articles from all of our clinicians at Evoke. Intensives, the August 15th to the 19th, Finding You in Park City, that looks like it is full. Finding You in October is open, October 7th to the 21st. Finding You November 7th to the 11th, and December 5th to the 9th. Coming soon, an alumni intensive for those who are graduates of Evoke that are 18 and older. We can customize family intensives for you all. And then there are professional growth workshops as well for women, September 9th to the 11th, and men July 8th to the 10th, so that passed. Okay, and if you want to learn more about those, you can email us at intensives@evoketherapy.com. All right, and Finding You Too is also coming up October 10th to the 14th. Parent support groups. I was just in Chicago last week. Thanks to all of you who came. It was wonderful to see you. New York City, August 6th. In Los Angeles, August 26th, the Bay Area, August 27th. Email melanie@evoketherapy.com to RSVP for those. And those are really powerful. The more support you can get from other parent families, the better. Parent workshops, really powerful to connect with other parents. Entrada, August 11th to the 12th. Cascade, September 22nd to the 23rd. This can usually be coupled with an in-field visit if your therapist feels it's appropriate for your child and your family at that time. Okay, so contact Gail at Evoke Therapy to RSVP for those workshops. Pursuits, it's like therapy light or adventure therapy, outdoor adventure trips that can be customized. All right. And the next webinar is Friday, August 3rd at 7 Mountain Time. And it's all about acceptance and commitment therapy with John Tobias, who's another one of our clinicians down in Entrada. He's wonderful. Okay. See you soon. Thank you so much for being on, and I will connect with you soon. Bye.